What if the life you're living right now is only a rehearsal for a life you're too afraid to actually attempt? Somewhere inside you, there is a version of yourself that you have never met. Not a fantasy, not a daydream, a real, achievable version of you, stronger, sharper, more honest, less afraid. And the strange, uncomfortable truth is this: most people will go their entire lives without ever encountering that version of themselves. Not because they lack ability, not because they lack time, but because somewhere along the way, they stopped asking the one question that matters most: what am I actually capable of becoming? Friedrich Nietzsche, the 19th century philosopher who spent his life interrogating human nature, believed that the tragedy of most human lives isn't failure, it's something quieter, something far more common. It's the slow, invisible abandonment of one's own becoming, trading the difficult, uncertain path of growth for the safety of a life already approved of by everyone else. By the end of this video, you'll understand why so many people never reach their true potential, and, more importantly, you'll understand the philosophical tools Nietzsche offers for beginning to change that, starting today. This isn't a story about motivation, it's a story about confrontation, with comfort, with fear, and with the self you've been avoiding. Let's begin. Here's an uncomfortable observation about modern life. Most people are not devastated by tragedy. They are dissolved by routine. They wake up, they perform the same rituals, they follow the same script written by family expectations, cultural norms, and quiet, unspoken fears. And slowly, without any single dramatic moment, their potential doesn't get destroyed, it gets postponed, indefinitely. Nietzsche observed this tendency in the people around him in 19th century Europe, and it's worth being precise here. He wasn't describing every human being who has ever lived. He was diagnosing a pattern, a psychological gravity that pulls many people toward conformity, toward the safety of the herd, toward what he called das Man in the language later developed by philosophers who built on his ideas, the anonymous, faceless one that dictates how we should think, dress, work, and live. The danger isn't that people consciously choose mediocrity. It's that they never consciously choose anything. They inherit a life. They inherit values. They inherit ambitions that were never truly theirs to begin with. And this is the first insight worth sitting with. Potential doesn't disappear through dramatic failure. It disappears through unchallenged repetition. Let's talk about comfort, because comfort is not the villain most people assume it to be. Comfort is subtler than that. It doesn't attack you. It seduces you. Picture two lives happening simultaneously. In one life, a person takes a risk, starts the business, ends the relationship that no longer serves them, moves to the unfamiliar city, says the truth they've been avoiding. This life is loud with uncertainty. It's full of stumbling, awkwardness, and real tangible fear. In the other life, a person stays. They tell themselves it's practical, reasonable, safe. They wait for the right time that never quite arrives. This life is quiet, comfortable, and also, without them fully realizing it, this life is slowly closing doors that will never open again. Nietzsche didn't moralize about which choice was correct in every circumstance. Life is genuinely complicated, and stability has real value. But he was deeply suspicious of comfort as an unexamined default. He believed that human beings have a natural tendency to avoid struggle, and that this avoidance, over time, doesn't preserve the self, it shrinks it. Comfort zones function like a prison with no visible bars. You can't see the walls because they're built from your own habits, excuses, and fears, reinforced daily until they feel like the natural shape of your life, rather than a construction you built yourself, one avoided risk at a time. This is why so many people describe a strange, hollow restlessness in their late 20s, their 30s, their 40s, a sense that something is missing, even though nothing catastrophic has happened. Nothing catastrophic needed to happen. The catastrophe was quieter than that. It was the slow erosion of possibility. So what does Nietzsche offer as an alternative? This is where his philosophy becomes genuinely radical, and it centers on a concept he called self-overcoming, or in German, Selbstüberwindung. Self-overcoming was central to Nietzsche's vision of what it means to live authentically. For Nietzsche,
beings are not fixed, finished creatures. We are not static identities to preserve and protect it. We are, in his words translated across countless interpretations, something that must be continually overcome, surpassed, refined, reshaped through struggle. This is a fundamentally different way of understanding growth than the modern self-help version, and the distinction matters. Modern self-improvement culture often frames growth as optimization, becoming more productive, more efficient, more successful by external metrics. Nietzsche's self-overcoming is something deeper and more internal. It's not about becoming more impressive to others. It's about confronting and transcending your own limitations, your own comfortable illusions, your own inherited values, even when no one is watching, even when there's no reward waiting on the other side. Self-overcoming demands that you treat your current self as a draft, not a final version. It requires you to identify the parts of yourself that are weak, fearful, or dishonest, and rather than hiding them or excusing them, to consciously work to transform them. This is uncomfortable work. Nietzsche never pretended otherwise. He associated real growth with suffering, not suffering for its own sake, but the specific, purposeful suffering that comes from pushing against your own limitations. He believed that struggle, when faced honestly, has the capacity to strengthen rather than destroy, that resistance, properly confronted, builds a kind of inner strength that comfort never could. Now here's where we need to talk about fear, specifically the fear of failure, because this fear is often the invisible force keeping people locked inside their comfort zones. Most people don't fear failure itself. They fear what failure might reveal, the possibility that they aren't as capable, as talented, or as special as they hoped. So instead of testing themselves and risking that revelation, they simply don't try. They keep their potential unexamined, safely theoretical, forever unproven, and therefore forever unfalsifiable. There's a strange comfort in this. If you never attempt the difficult thing, you never have to face the possibility that you might fail at it. Your potential remains a comforting story you tell yourself, rather than a reality you've tested. But Nietzsche's philosophy suggests something unsettling. An untested potential isn't really potential at all. It's just a pleasant fiction. Real self-overcoming requires risking failure, repeatedly, deliberately, not recklessly, but honestly, because it's only through that risk that you discover what you're actually capable of, rather than what you'd like to imagine you're capable of. If this idea is resonating with you, take a moment to hit like and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel continue creating content that takes philosophy seriously and applies it to the way we actually live. Now let's go deeper. Let's talk about approval, because this might be the most psychologically dangerous force keeping people locked between their potential and their comfort zones. Human beings are social creatures. We're wired, evolutionarily and psychologically, to care what others think of us. This isn't weakness, it's biology. But Nietzsche warned about a specific corruption of this instinct, a state where a person's entire value system becomes outsourced to external judgment. He was deeply critical of what he saw as herd morality, value systems adopted not because they were personally examined and chosen, but because they were simply inherited, absorbed from family, religion, and society without question. Living according to the herd, in Nietzsche's framework, means measuring your life by standards you never actually chose for yourself. This creates a particular kind of quiet suffering. A person can achieve every external marker of success, the career, the house, the relationship status, the social approval, and still feel a persistent gnawing emptiness, because none of those achievements were ever truly examined. They were simply the goals that were supposed to be wanted. Nietzsche's alternative wasn't rebellion for its own sake. Becoming contrarian simply to be different is just another form of living according to external standards, only inverted. His alternative was something more demanding, genuine self-examination, asking, with real honesty, which of your values are truly your own, and which were simply installed in you by people who never asked you what you wanted either. This is one of the most quietly courageous acts a person can undertake, separating your authentic desires from your inherited ones. It's uncomfortable because it often reveals that some of what you've been chasing was never actually yours to chase. Let's make this concrete with a story, a composite drawn from patterns.
Calm. Therapists and coaches describe again and again, representative of a struggle many people face. Picture a man in his early 30s. Call him David. He works a stable corporate job, the kind his parents were proud of when he accepted the offer. He has a comfortable apartment, a predictable routine, a life that looks, from the outside, entirely fine. But David feels something he can't quite articulate, a persistent sense that he's watching his own life happen to him rather than actively living it. He had once wanted to build something of his own, a business, a creative project, something that felt genuinely his. But that ambition got quietly buried under years of practical decisions, each one reasonable in isolation, each one moving him further from the person he'd once imagined becoming. The turning point wasn't dramatic. There was no single crisis. It was a slow accumulation of small, honest questions he finally allowed himself to ask. Whose life am I actually living? When did I stop choosing and start just continuing? David didn't quit his job overnight or blow up his life in some cinematic gesture. that's not how real self-overcoming typically works. Instead, he began small, deliberate acts of discomfort. He started the side project he'd buried years earlier, working on it in the early mornings before work, telling almost no one, because he needed to test it against his own standards before subjecting it to anyone else's judgment. He failed constantly at first. His early attempts were mediocre. But something shifted in how he related to that failure. Instead of treating it as evidence of his limitations, he began treating it as information. Each failure told him something true about where he currently stood and gave him something concrete to overcome. Slowly, the project became something real, not because David found some hidden reservoir of talent he didn't know he had, but because he stopped protecting himself from the risk of finding out. So what can you actually take from this? First, audit your comfort. Look honestly at the areas of your life where you've stopped growing and ask whether that stillness is genuine contentment or quiet avoidance dressed up as stability. Second, separate inherited values from chosen ones. Take an honest inventory of your ambitions. For each one, ask, is this something I genuinely want or something I was taught to want? Third, treat failure as data, not verdict. Every attempt that doesn't work isn't proof of your limitations. It's information about your current position, which you're free to change. Fourth, practice small, consistent self-overcoming. Nietzsche's vision wasn't about a single dramatic transformation. It was about a discipline, daily, deliberate confrontation with your own resistance, your own excuses, your own comfortable illusions. None of this is easy. Nietzsche never promised ease. He promised something else, the possibility of becoming genuinely, authentically yourself, rather than a well-behaved copy of everyone else's expectations. Here's the truth this philosophy leaves us with. Your potential was never meant to be comfortable. It was never meant to arrive without cost. It exists on the other side of the very things you've been avoiding: risk, judgment, failure, uncertainty. Most people will never meet the version of themselves that Nietzsche believed was possible, not because that version doesn't exist, but because meeting them requires walking directly toward the discomfort most people spend their entire lives walking away from. You don't have to be most people. The life you haven't lived yet is still available to you. It's waiting on the other side of one honest decision, to stop rehearsing and start becoming. If this resonated with you, comment below, I choose growth. Let it be a declaration. Let it be the first small act of overcoming. Because the person you're capable of becoming isn't a fantasy. They're simply waiting for you to stop avoiding them.